to bring your practice into every single aspect of your life.
When we come to our practices with a sense of sincerity, coming into your practice with a sense of self-empowerment, I think is also very important.
It's not about how many books you have out or how many followers you have. We all have the same value. We're all part of the same stuff.
You're not just healing that present situation, you're working through it in your past and your future. Your medicine could be someone else's poison, and their poison can be your medicine. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new podcast. This is the Infernal Alchemy podcast with your host, Christian, a.k.a. the Atlantean Alchemist, and
Viv, a.k.a. Lunar Faery Witch.
So today for you guys, we just want to share kind of like our introduction, our story, before we get into some hot topics. So first, Viv is going to share her story, where she came from and her background as to how she came to be who she is today.
So, I grew up kind of a weird combination of Christian and Muslim. And a lot of people get very confused when I say that. It was mainly kind of a cultural thing, and also the fact that me and my mother moved around a lot. And at some point, we lived in a village in England where the only like religious center or place that we knew of was a church. And so, I kind of switched between Islam and Christianity growing up. I didn't have too bad of an experience with Islam, and I still relate to it on a cultural level. But with Christianity, I had kind of a hard time, and it just wasn't right for me. And so I started doubting it, and searching for something different, something that would actually work for me. And so I started having a recurring dream where I would be in this beautiful meadow and there was a man in front of me, but he had this godly energy. He didn't have a human energy. It was very powerful, very pure, and his energy felt very kind. And, in the last dream, he turned into a stag and he went into the forest as if, telling me to go with him. And then later on, I discovered that that was Cernunnos, and he's now my patron god. I still work with him. I'll always work with him. Um, he means a lot to me in my practice. He's the god that I've been with the longest in terms of, having that kind of working relationship with a god. And I started off Wiccan in this path. I looked into Wicca because the horned god and everything, and it's also the most accessible thing. It's the first thing you're likely to find when looking into witchcraft or even the occult. And so I started off like that and went from there. I still have a lot of respect for that because it helped me a lot on my path. It helped me break away from something that was making me unhappy. And then, I kind of got into the spiritual but not religious thing as I was working through my religious trauma, basically. And then now I'm a pagan and a demonolator and a witch.
That's awesome. You never told me the story about Cronus.
Yeah, I haven't. That's crazy because that's one of my most profound, stories.
It's like, follow me to the forest, and I'll show you what you're missing out.
Exactly.
So going on with my own story, I came from a Christian background. My family, Catholic. There is lot of practitioners in my family that practice Santeria and Spiritismo, because I'm from Cuban descent. So I didn't really get to connect with that in my own childhood. My mom was afraid of all those things, so she kept me out of the dark of that and converted to Christianity around the time that I was born. So I wasn't really exposed to all the spiritual traditions of my own family, only the language and culture in terms of like food and slang. So when I was going through my phases in like middle school and early high school, I began to feel like something was off, something was different about me in relation to other people. Like I felt like something was off, and I got really deep into poetry to help express those emotions. It was later than that, by identifying my own sexuality, that I found that Christianity was not for me anymore. Even though I never had a negative connotation, I didn't grow up with the idea of burning in hellfire for every little thing. That wasn't my experience with Christianity. So it was actually quite positive up until, I would say, subsections of types of people that come from that religion that really, I guess, rubbed me the wrong way. And later on, so I went into actually more of like a new age light worker scene. It's very off and very different from what I do now. Um, but it was actually through researching my family's history that got me on my spiritual path. And I started out working with chakras, learning how to work with crystals, working with angels. And those are the three things that I focused on and harnessed during that time period that I identified as a light worker. Um, and strangely enough, though, I was never really called to my family's practices, even though after I learned about it. So like for example, some of the practices that they did, I know my great grandparents, they had these African American dolls that were like the guardians of the home. And I can't remember their names off the top of my head right now, but there was a guardian just for my great grandmother, and there was a guardian that's for me and my sister and my mother that kind of represent the family and the generations. And my great grandfather would tell me stories of the spirit called the Elewa, which is this spirit who was took the form of a little boy with a bouncing ball, and he can transform and shapeshift into some like very gigantic guardian. And he had something going on with a coconut that you would break it every New Year's Eve in honor of the spirit to continue the protections and replace the coconut every year. Um, so there were some aspects of like Santeria in there, which I know they weren't Santeria practitioners. They were into Spiritismo with Catholicism. They had very elaborate altars all the time. And I would always ask questions, but I could never remember the names of all the saints that they had available there. But saint work has always been very interesting to me, even though it's not part of my own practice. I was taken on a completely different route. So after going through that and kind of learning more about my own culture, I went into looking into magic and mysticism. I think I really started out with Wicca, even though I never identified as a Wiccan. One of my first books was Great Gay Witchcraft from Christopher Penczak. And that really opened my eyes into the spiritual truths and like theory of what it means for sexuality and gender fluidity to be involved and incorporated into one's practice, and the spiritual significance of it. And that's where I really began to feel more accepting of myself. And I grew up actually with a lot of resentment towards God, because I felt like I wasn't receiving what I needed in my everyday life. Especially in my preteens, I was not in the best mindset. So coming out of my early teen years and into like about like 16, 17 is when I really got into magic. And that's where I got into learning about the Norse gods. I got into learning about the Greco-Roman gods. I've always really loved Greek mythology since I was little. I was learning about it, especially the story of Icarus. That was really something that came through a lot for me. And somehow interweaving angels still became a very strong part of my path. I've been studying angels for 7 years now. Um, Actually, it's probably on to 8 now, but getting onto the idea that, my path took me somewhere completely separate from my own culture. Um, and I was taken to such a place where I truly felt loved and cared for. Um, with Freya being my main patroness. She came through first before anyone else. But Balder was the god that was first initially introduced to, who helped me learn forgiveness, who helped me learn how to connect more deeply with other people, and to experience more compassion in my everyday. And he really helped me heal the wounds of Christianity, and change my perspective. And he was kind of like my gateway to the rest of the Norse gods. And Odin followed suit after Freya. And my life honestly changed so much since their arrival. And through my work with chakras and stuff like that, I was very focused in the beginning to just focus on honing my psychic gifts and abilities. And I got to a point finally where I felt confident in my communication. Because when you're starting out, you require a lot of discernment building, and sometimes you need a lot of secondhand guidance and confirmation in the beginning, as you're learning to build that confidence in yourself. And it was through that I learned so much about myself in terms of, like, I remember many of my past lives and what they have in relation to these gods that are now coming through, realizing that even though my path may look different than my own culture, it's something that is very sacred deep down to my core, that has taught me a lot of humility. And I grew up as well with a lot of influences of Buddhism in my life because my mom's love and appreciation for Buddhism. So that was interwoven into my path as well very early on. Um, and my path now, I would say, is very interwoven into Shintoism because of its aspect of animism and recognizing the divinity within all things. And I think that's important, or a really important transition to where it got me today. It's been about 4 to 3 years now where I've gotten into working into the left-hand path, working with demons as a demonolator. And I now, through the pandemic, have got my Reiki Master certification. And now I work with the demonic divine, and I've had to learn a completely different route to everything that I once knew. And I learned that in my own path that light and darkness are not two separate things. They're the same thing on the same two sides of a coin. And here we are now today making this podcast. I hope my story was a little bit enlightening to our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. I could relate to, the culture thing where I feel like there's a lot of pressure for people to be like, oh, you have to do practices that are only like within your culture. And I think it's great to connect to your culture and everything, but you're not always going to resonate with everything just because it's from your culture, like, from my culture, yes, I do think some of my fascination with demons does come from the fact that a lot of them originate in the Middle East, but I also don't relate to every single magical practice from that area. And a lot of my magical practice is more earth-based paganism and more like Celtic stuff, which I do have roots in that as well, but it's not, I grew more up with one side of the culture than I did the other. And I think that that's okay. And I think it's something people need to recognize is that, it's okay to explore different practices and find what fits you. If you have the same culture as me, let's say you're Turkish and you want to be a Wiccan, I don't think anyone should judge you for that because that's your personal practice.
Yeah, I feel like we judge each other too often on what a path should look like. Um, Sometimes even based off appearances. And the truth be told is that no one walks the same path. Even if everyone had the same traditions, everyone's going to do it differently in their own way. There is going to be always some form of deviation that's rooted in our own truths, because that is honestly what matters in all of this, coming back to ourselves.
Mhm. Absolutely. And then the other thing was, you mentioned like your sexuality and like how, going into this path, I feel like, growing up a lot of the time, we're taught to suppress it. We're taught you have to be cis and you have to be straight. Otherwise, you're like bad or dirty or something. And then coming into this path, I'm not saying there isn't transphobia or homophobia, because there certainly is. But it's so refreshing to see more representation of, people like me who are non-binary or people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, whatever, LGBT, right? Um, because the shit it's not a good feeling to be told that you are lesser than a straight person or a cis person just because you're not straight or cis. And I do appreciate authors like Christopher Penczak who and I think Storm Fairy Wolf is writing a book about that or something like that, who place an emphasis on that because it is so important to create spaces for us to thrive and be accepted for who we are.
Yeah, and it's interesting as like we see more newer generations, we see a lot more openness, more acceptance of gender identity and sexuality. I think there's been a lot more of like an awakening to that and more of an acceptance. And we're going to see it a lot more interwoven into people's practices as we move forward. Especially like I know there's a book out called Queering Your Craft. Um, that one is also really good that I've seen as well. But that's been my personal journey to coming into my own path. I focus a lot now on the idea of balance and harmonizing light and darkness in my practice. I don't identify as a light worker anymore, even though technically you kind of always do the work. I think you always kind of come back into it because you have to get through the nitty gritty to get to the real shit that that's going on. And somehow, even though you have things that go on within you, it always comes back to external events and playing your own part in things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the beautiful things about this path or these paths, because there are many paths within this path, is the work. And I really do like the Norse concept of weird, and it kind of ties into the idea that your actions affect everything. It's like a ripple effect kind of thing. And also, I think that that is a way to bring your practice into every single aspect of your life. So you're supporting local businesses and helping people in your local area. That could be part of your spiritual practice. You're planting seeds, you're caring for the earth, that could be part of your personal practice. You treating other people with kindness could be a way to honor your gods. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things is that as you go down the path, you realize that anything, literally anything, could be a part of your practice. If you cook food and you give it to people, that could be part of your practice. Like all acts of kindness can be ways to honor your gods, and it could be like offerings for your gods, right? Um, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing that I think should be emphasized more is that the idea that yes, your daily practice could be spell work. You could be meditating, and that's great. I do that every day. It's my daily practice. Meditating, not spell work. I don't do a spell every day. Um, but could also be, placing an emphasis on acts of kindness or recycling or being more eco-friendly, whatever it is. It doesn't have to look a certain way.
Yeah, I think that when we come to our practices with a sense of sincerity, reverence, and a sense of like awe of the practice, where we see everything as sacred, we learn that other people play a very large part in our lives, as well as how big of a part we play in the lives of others. And we also learn to simplify our practice that way by coming to practice with a sense of humility, but also coming into your practice with a sense of self-empowerment, I think is also very important. To not humble yourself too much, but to be very aware of what your own power is and the role that you play, being very clear, very direct in your approach. And the path may not always look at something straight. It may not be something so very clear. I know many people that are still trying to figure out their paths. I think it's really about just enjoying the ride and being able to put the name to the face later on. I think that's really important. And that's kind of what I've had to learn in my own path.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And also, our paths are constantly changing. My path 5 or 10 years from now will probably look different as I learn, as I grow. And that's completely okay. Like, you don't have to have a static path. In fact, I think having a path that changes and shifts over time is a good thing, and also, the knowing your power, but also being humble. I think that also plays into what you mentioned earlier about balance. And that's super, super important. How you interact with people, but also how you interact with yourself, is really important in, not putting yourself down, but not also placing yourself above everyone else and thinking you're better than everyone else because of, oh, I work with these gods, they're better than yours, which is ridiculous. Or, oh, I have a bigger follower count, I have a book published, I have this, I have that, and you don't, when that's not really what it's about at the end of the day. And I think it's really easy to fall into that because in our society, material wealth and gains are what are emphasized the most, people in our society value what job you have over who you are as a person in a lot of cases, or how much money you have. And we don't exist in a vacuum. So, of course, that's going to go over into our community as well. But it's super important to be cognizant of that and remember the fact that, it's not about how many books you have out or how many followers you have. At the end of the day, your accomplishments are important, but they don't make you better than anyone else, especially since if you're a spiritual person, we're all ultimately the same. We all have the same value. We're all part of the same stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important for people to very clearly identify what their path is, like their tenets. So, like, think about it. Like, what are the foundational beliefs that you have about how the world works? I don't think people really sit down and write that out and really feel into what their own path is. I do have a few written down here that I wanted to share with you guys, kind of what's been of my own practice and share with you a little bit more about kind of what my own path has led me to do in terms of magic and spellcasting. I know I don't talk a lot about it a lot online, so I'm allowing myself to speak a little bit more about my own personal practice on this podcast. So in the my 10 tenets of my practice, I identify that all things within nature have a soul or possess some sort of divine intelligence and are to be respected as such. So this comes into the idea of animism. Also the idea that all things within nature are interconnected. There is no event that occurs separate from ourselves. So this goes to the idea that we're in this big ecosystem, that every little thing impacts each other. And we're getting into like more hermeticism here. Of cause and effect. And all things before you are a reflection of your inner world. Just are things of the world above are a reflection of the world below. Um, where when we feel some sort of shift, this could even be astrological, it impacts our everyday life and how we navigate it, and vice versa. Um, I also go into my practice about how the past, present, and future are things that do not occur separately but occur simultaneously. So, this is the idea of when you're focusing on healing or bringing energy to a specific situation, being aware that if you go beyond the idea of time, be aware that everything impacts it. So like when you're doing inner child work, or it could be doing your shadow work, any kind of inner trauma work, you're not just healing that present situation, you're working through it in your past and your future. And that goes with everything that we do. I think when we consider the results of our past, of our present, and our future, we can move a lot more clearly on our path and more decisively, um, instead of feeling like some area of our being is holding us back, because all these things are occurring at once. Um, Whether we like to think so or not, at least that's been in my experience. Another thing is that all things within nature are inherently good. It is through the idea that when we take on what they call in Shintoism kegare, or spiritual impurity, like miasma, we lose our sense of connection to our own divinity. So in my own practice, it focuses on the idea that purification brings us back to that core essence of ourself that can never be. And it's the idea that despite any traumas, any corruptions, anything that may throw us off on a daily basis, we could come back to center. We could come back to ourselves and what our divinity looks like. And the idea also of sincerity, earnesty, and reverence for anything within life and death has been a big part of my practice. I find that spirits are more approachable, not only to you, but they're more open to you when you approach them with this mannerism. And all things within nature seek balance within itself. The idea that everything already is always looking to harmonize itself and find its balance, but intentionally looking to obtain balance and harmony, I think is what helps practices evolve much quicker. Because whether we realize it or not, sometimes things are used to fill a void, and we don't realize that void. And then when we actually do conscientiously open ourselves up to that situation, we're aware of what we actually needed all along, and we can balance ourselves more conscientiously. All of life is looking to balance itself. This could be with the seasons, it could be with the tides in nature. And that's just been in my own practice. The other things that come to mind is the idea that darkness and light are held within everything. The idea that we're essentially exploring our own alignment and our own path in between these infinities, in between these elements. And there's no right or wrong. It's more about what your affinity, what resonates with you, what empowers you, what builds you up. That may look completely different to someone else. Your medicine could be someone else's poison, and their poison can be your medicine. So nothing in excess in that sense. And as you notice, I'm kind of quoting some Hermeticism in there, as well as some philosophies that are interwoven into my own practice. There's also the idea that we will have to go through in order to evolve and become greater. And that's where the idea of fate and destiny in my own path.
I resonate with a lot of those very balanced ideas. For me personally, my values and my tenets, I guess you could say, have shifted a lot. Now I don't have them written down. I'm not super structured in that way. I do write things down, but not a lot of things. But I would say I take a lot of lessons from nature. So I look at the cycles, and the cycles of nature inform my views about the cycles of life and death, and cycles of life and endings in life, and beginnings and doors opening. So, when we look at the cycles of nature, it's ending, but it's also never ending, right? It keeps going. And in life, I feel that kind of makes me think of the idea that whenever a door closes, another door opens, right? So it's important not to lose hope. Whenever something ends, it almost always makes way for something different, a new adventure. And I've had to learn that a lot, where I get very attached to things and then they'll end and then I'll get very upset. And I've learned now to look at it from a different perspective and understand that it's just a new phase of my life starting. Um, and when I look at the trees and I see their roots deep in the earth. And I also read an article a while ago about how trees have a sort of system where they almost help each other and they send signals to each other. And that kind of, I can kind of connect that to community and to helping each other out, but also the fact that we're all individuals, but we're also connected to everything and to everyone. And I think that's really important. It's really important to maintain individualism, in my opinion. Don't get lost in everything and lose yourself, but also maintain that wholeness and the fact that you are still connected to everything. Your actions affect everything around you, and I do draw a bit from different philosophies. So, the practices I've either practiced or studied have all kind of influenced my view. So in terms of Wicca, that very earth-based view that you can kind of tell with me talking about lessons from nature, it kind of mainly is what informs me with Wicca, and now with paganism, right? I'd say I'm an eclectic pagan and very earth-based. Um, but also, for example, some of the things from Satanism, like individualism, that kind of emphasis on individualism, that kind of anti-establishment type of idea. And then also beyond my spiritual practice in terms of subcultures, um, and like views on life in general, I hold individualism very dear to me, but also community. So, again, it's that balance kind of thing where it's not one or the other, that both are important. Um, and light and dark, I used to lean towards the light, now I lean towards the dark. I do find that balance is important between the two, but I also think it's okay to be more attracted to the darkness and not feel guilty for it. Because, in our society, you are made to feel guilty for that. You are, if you're goth or if you're on a more left-hand path, quote unquote, left-hand path, spiritual path, you were kind of made to feel as if, oh, look, it's just another edgelord, or oh, look, they're evil, or, they probably sacrifice babies, whatever. And that's not true. Some of the more darkly inclined people I've known have been the kindest, um, especially knowing people who were goth or Satanists or whatever, or both. A lot of them are both, and a lot of them were the kindest people I've met. But they've always been ostracized for it, and they've always been deemed evil for it. And I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I think that it's important to not judge people based on appearances and their inclination towards light or dark, because neither is evil and neither is bad. And those are kind of my main things I go by. I do tend to look at things situationally, so I'm not always kind to everyone. I'm kind to most people, but if they overstep my boundaries or if they're unkind to me, then they better expect, you know, they better expect me to be not so nice back. Um,
This ass whooping of their life.
Literally the ass whooping of their life. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, where someone will disrespect my boundaries and I will call them out. Like, especially since I started working with Lilith, she is like, take no shit. Um, I've noticed that in the workplace as well, where someone will try to rush me and be like, "Hey, we need this right now, right now," and they're not my manager, right? They're just a coworker, and I will be like, "Stop! I am working on it. Get out, leave." And setting boundaries, I think boundaries are super important. And working with Lilith has kind of shed light on that for me, because my entire life, a lot of it due to my upbringing, I've had a lot of trouble with boundaries because I wasn't taught to maintain them, and I was often kind of punished for having boundaries. I'm sure a lot of us had that experience growing up. And so Lilith has really, especially Lilith, has taught me, having boundaries and maintaining them is a form of self-love, and it's really important. And a lot of us were not taught that growing up, so we kind of have to teach ourselves. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, that's awesome. We haven't really discussed some of our demons yet in our own practice. going into talking about the Infernal Divine, um, my path really, I want to say, started out with Dantelion. Dantelion was the first of the Goetic spirits that I've ever worked with. We hit it off very quickly. I think also because I'm a psychology major, and he's very psychological. He likes to understand people the way they think. Um, and he's very big on the quality of bonds and not the quantity. He has helped me to work through my fears of working with the Infernal Divine. And I know Viv and I have talked a lot about this, where we run into a lot of the programming that we kind of deal with of good versus evil. And there's so many shows out there that every antagonist is going to be some dark villain, shrouded in darkness, an aura of darkness, and then the character is always shrouded in this light. No matter what show you watch, you can't seem to escape it, in media, and even in the way that monotheistic religions kind of promote the idea of the battle of good versus evil. I think it's very romanticized at the same time as well, and it's been around for a long time, and that affects our ability to work with the demonic divine and see them truly as individuals separate from the idea that darkness equals evil or good or whatever, but realizing that they are neutral beings. They're basically human in the sense that they have their own unique nature. And just as you can go up to any other person, it doesn't inherently mean that that person is going to be cruel and unusual upon meeting. And I think that goes with spirits as well. And that really needed to be addressed for a lot of people. Um, but Dantelion really started off for me, helping me work through that. And it was through after Dantelion that I began working with Hegenti. And Hegenti's been a big part of my practice and my business. You guys may even see it as the logo. In with also Lilith Sigil interwoven into our banner. Um, and from then on with Hagenti and Dantelion, I gained so many support from the Infernal Divine, with Lucifer coming through, King Belial, King Paimon. And it doesn't seem to end, it just keeps going. Uh, and even now, I have Hades and Persephone who has joined me on my path, kind of working within the chthonic realm still. It's been a very empowering path for me. I ended up into the left hand path by overcoming situations of codependency. I was in a very codependent situationship, and it was through being able to choose myself over someone else for the first time that that whole path opened up for me. And ever since, I have not gone back. And I have amassed this great sense of self-love and self-acceptance and confidence because of this path. And it honestly, in believing in the quality of this path, is how this podcast has come to be for both of us. A lot of my magic, because I didn't get to discuss this, a lot of my magic with the Norse gods is I've learned to work with the runes, runic bindings, Galder, and Satyr magic have been a very big part of my practice. I do a lot of sigil magic, largely around the ideas of and concepts of chaos magic. I also do a lot of crystal magic, and I do work with a lot of herbs as well in my practice. I'm getting more into herbalism, and I currently identify as a gray hedge witch because of how deeply spirits are interwoven into my path, as well as working with the spirits of the herbs and of the stones, taking a very animistic point of view. And there's been a lot of growth and connection with the idea of connecting with like Lucifer and his aspects, especially on a theistic point of view, um, and working with him and developing and cultivating myself as an individual. Um, and with Bilal teaching me self mastery and helping me to come into myself as a leader, so that they may stand beside me in my own path. And those have been really major influences of my practice to date. What about you, Viv?
So in terms of demons, demonolatry, whatever you wanna call it, the first demon, I guess you would say, was Lilith, and she actually pretty much led me on this path. She encouraged me to start working with other demons as well. Um, I adore her. I don't know, I can't describe it in words how much I love her. She has changed me so much, and I have not worked with her for a super, super long time, but she's already changed me in so many profound ways, and shown me so many profound lessons, I guess, or taught me so many profound lessons. And she was my introduction. She was my first one. And she has empowered me in a lot of ways. And even though I'm non-binary, I still connect to my feminine side, right? And she is really her and Aphrodite have really helped with cultivating that and with empowering myself and shedding those societal anti-feminine views where, you're always told to cover up, you're always told to be ashamed of yourself for being um for having certain body parts. You're told to, I don't know, oh, you have to be married to do this, you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to be a lady, you have to, and I'm like, fuck all that. Um, so they've really taught me to not go with any of that, right? Because all of that is anti I feel like all of that is anti-female liberation, and then on my masculine side, I've really got Cernunnos and even more recently Lucifer helping cultivate that side of me. And I don't go with the male female dichotomy, but rather I seek to blend those things and to reconcile those two sides. Um, and actually, the funny thing is my spiritual practice helped me realize that I'm non-binary. And I thought that was interesting. And that's another reason I'm very grateful for this path, and that it's open to that. It's open to, you can be non-binary and practice, obviously. And you've got, for example, Baphomet, who is androgynous. And so it's a very real part of the path I'm on. It's not something that's shamed or looked down upon. And same with femininity. My feminine side is not shamed or looked down upon, especially working with Lilith. Um, in terms of Lucifer, he's been kind of helping me with not only knowledge, because I'm very good about reading, I'm very good about researching, always have been. I've ever since I was a little kid, I've loved to read, but actually applying it to my practice and to my everyday life. So you're not just reading the book, you are practicing the book. You are taking what's in there and applying it to your practice and wisdom, not just knowledge. And that's been kind of my main focus with him so far. Although, it's connecting with him on that level has been kind of recent. I've connected him in the past, but connecting with him on a deeper level has been a more recent thing for me. Um, who else? Obviously, Cernunnos. I mentioned Cernunnos earlier. I work very heavily with the water element. It's the element I connect with the most. I have an entire altar just for water magic, sea magic. Even though I don't live next to the sea, but I'd love to. But you don't have to live next to the sea to connect to its energy. Um, two of my favorite books on water magic or sea magic by Sandra Kynes and Water Witchcraft by Anwen Avalon. And I do want to get Anwen Avalon's other book, and I do know Lilith Dorsey also wrote a book on, I think it was on water magic, so I definitely want to get that. Also connecting with Mother, I don't know if this sounds whatever, connecting with Mother Earth, Gaia, but also I I don't put that masculine or feminine thing. I don't think of I would say Mother Earth, but I'd say, I don't know, Mother and Father Earth, because I do feel both of those energies as I work with the earth. But every single day I ground and I connect to the earth. So the earth is also a big part of my practice. Um, and, praying to the nine demonic divine, that's a big part. So I do kind of connect with all nine of those demons, but I connect on a deeper level. The deepest level, probably with Lilith and, the other deities I work with. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Funny because when with connecting with nature, I feel that too. There's this sense of duality,
Mhm.
um, like unified. Like when it comes to both, well, like most plants, they have both a feminine and a masculine part to them.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like through connecting with nature, we also are able to connect with the unification of like light and darkness or gender. And I've been getting more into that, especially as I'm getting into herbalism a lot more and working with plant magic. So I just love that you touched on that.
Yes, I love yes, that reminds me, I love herbalism as well. It's plant magic is so fun because there's never a time where you run out of plants, you know? You can always explore so many. I've recently been exploring blue lotus, learning about its history is fascinating. If you want, go look into the history of blue lotus, anyone who's listening, because it's one of the most interesting plants I've ever studied. Um, but yeah, one of the things when I started out, or a couple years into my practice, was that I started with the working with herbs and stuff, and it really helps you connect with earth, water, your magic in general. Like you can really feel out those energies and learn so much from the spirits of the plants, you know?
Yeah. And it's funny that you touched on water magic because that's also a really big part of my practice. Um, for a while, I was actually working with Leviathan. He came through when I was reading the book on water witchcraft and all the books on water magic, and I was reading about the merfolk and stuff like that. Um, he was coming through to kind of open me up to an idea of a certain path I could walk. Um, and in the end, I found that integrating water magic is what I wanted, but for it to not be the entirety of my practice. And I think in the end, that was my best choice. But water and earth based elements, working with those two, I think is the most healing and empowering for me because I'm a very fiery spirit and very air oriented. I have an Aquarius stellium, um, and I just have so much fire in me being a Sagittarius that it's just I need those other elements to balance me out. Um being here in Florida, I live by the ocean and stuff like that. Even though I don't connect much with the ocean, I like to connect more with like seashells. Um, I'm not a big person on sand. I've never liked sand. I've always liked like waves and this and like the tides and seashells. That's always been my pleasure to like collect and like just kind of gather around me. Um, but yeah, I'm getting more into drawing into those things into my own practice. Um, I feel like after focusing so much on like the ethereal and the spiritual, I'm learning to kind of find that in my everyday resources.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like, earth-based spirituality it'll always be the thing that calls to me the most, and water as well. I'm the same way as you. Water and earth are my two elements that are so healing, right? I'm an Aries, so we're both fire signs, so it kind of makes sense. Gotta balance out that anger and that, that fire. Although I feel like you don't seem like an angry person to me at all. But me, I recently got on anger management, so
My Scorpio rising.
yeah, I don't feel so alone. So I recently got this book, How to Keep Your Cool: An Ancient Guide to Anger Management.
Oh
So
wow.
hopefully that'll help me out. I feel like I might chilled out to a lot of people, but if you follow me on Twitter or if you know me, like if you know me, you probably know about that. So that Aries energy, balancing out, but in all seriousness, balancing out those energies with, the elements you work with, I think it's really helpful. Like, and then also, I guess I do have a lot of water in my chart. So, it kind of goes both ways where you have certain things in your chart that you want to balance out with other things, but then you also have those things in your chart that makes you feel drawn to that thing, right? Like I have a Scorpio moon, and to me, that dark, watery, that abyss water, that's me.
Yeah, I feel that too. I think that's why Leviathan came through too.
Yeah, actually, I had an experience with Leviathan not too long ago where I was meditating, and he took me through the abyss water. And it was pretty cool. I'm not gonna get too much into it.
Oh, I think I saw it on YouTube, right? Is
Huh?
a guided meditation? There's
No.
a there's one on Leviathan, a guided meditation.
Oh, I gotta try it. Like, literally, I didn't even expect him to come through. I was just, like, meditating, and then suddenly he came through, and I was like, "Oh, I'm in some abyss water." And he was like, "Okay," and then, um, it was interesting because it was very unexpected, like, it wasn't on purpose, where, a lot of the time I'll connect to a deity on purpose, like, "Okay, today I'm gonna light this candle with Lilith's sigil on it, and I'll connect to Lilith." Um, but no, I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna meditate, take a few breaths, have a good start to my day," and then Leviathan's like,
As we're reaching the end to this episode, did you want to share any like where we could find you on your links and social media?
yeah, so on YouTube, I'm Lunar Faery Witch. The fairy is spelled Faery, not with an I. And then on all my other social medias, my username is Continuous Death, but the E in death is a 3. So that's where you can find me. How about you?
I love that. For me, the Atlantean Alchemists. You could find me on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, as well as on this podcast. Um, I will see you guys in the next episode where we will be talking more in-depth discussions. I hope that you guys have liked this introduction. And I'll see you guys around. Thank you guys so much for listening in.